addressing conferences and corporate boardrooms on digital DNA, digital transformation and innovation. Hans is a fellow of Deloitte Center for the Age, which partners with senior executives to make sense of and profit from emerging opportunities on the edge of business and technology. In both roles, Hans helps leaders understand the fundamental technology drivers changes that shapes their business world, navigate short-term challenges, and identify long-term opportunities. Hans is also a part-time executive lecturer at Nyan Road Business School on the topic of digital disruption and innovation. Lastly, I would like to remind you that there will be a Q&A section after the speech. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Grieken. Please.
There should be audio now.
Power changed how things were manufactured. But there hasn't been just one industrial revolution. The manufacturing industry has reinvented itself many times. The first industrial revolution is the familiar one. Beginning in the late 18th century, manufacturers used steam engines and hydraulic power in factories to make production more efficient. The second revolution began in the late 19th century, when electricity and assembly lines made mass production.
Well, I'm sure that you know the story, so I'll continue quickly if I can make my pointer work. Yes, so you already introduced me. That's also helpful, so we can skip that as well. The audio is a bit delayed, but I'm sure it will work in a moment.
Calendar.
No meetings today. Remember, tandläkare at 9:30.
Fire off.
Fire off.
Open door.
Door open.
Sånn, så skal vi sette en til.
Ja. Open door.
Wrong voice command.
Open door.
Wrong voice command.
Open door.
Repeat that.
Open door.
I didn't understand that.
Hey, open door.
Play on the floor.
Get over the floor. Open the door.
Wrong voice command. Error.
Hey, there. With a rock. Open door. Open door. Open door. Higher.
Higher volume.
Higher.
Higher.
Well, it makes the point nicely. There's new technology all over the place. And apart from trying to create a joke after lunch, there's another reason why I'm showing this video. How many platforms did you see? Security, music, climate. Without us realizing, platforms are sort of taking over our lives. Social media, Internet of Things platforms. And platforms is one of the typical manifestations of disruption in the industrial world. So I want to spend some time reflecting on what we see in the world. But before I do that, apart from the jobs that you mentioned, I thought I'd mention also that I know your type of industry a bit from another perspective, and that is that I've been a supervisory board member in industrial and tech companies for the past 11 years. Currently, I'm in this company. They are the world market leader in greenhouse automation. When I started out with the company, their message was, we are a product company. And gradually, I tried to convince them, and finally have succeeded, that they are not a product company. They are a technology company that happens to be in climate control in greenhouses. But we can do that anywhere else, apart from greenhouses. And actually, currently, we are investing a lot in using robotics and artificial intelligence to identify that one yellow leaf that needs to be removed every 20 seconds, 24/7. replacing 17 employees in an average greenhouse. In other words, from a, by the way, this is vertical farming, in which you produce the lettuce next to the supermarket. By the way, the biggest hit at the moment is cannabis in California and in Canada for medical purposes. It's just to illustrate that although I talk a lot about technology and I research technology, I also invest into, let's say, helping companies from their governance point of view create this new value. I'm a bit struggling with my pointer, but I hope you will forgive me for that. We as Deloitte, we produce a lot of what we call eminence research. And today I want to give you a bit of an overview of some of the research that we have produced in the past in order to hopefully be able... Can somebody click there, because it's a bit of a challenge, my pointer. Okay, now it's working. As an introduction to the industrial world, about 30 years ago, I was part of a team that created the first navigation system in the world. It was a system called Karin, and to show the city of Eindhoven, we would need the whole van with racks of disks, and we assumed that you needed a keyboard because you needed to be able to type, and we assumed that you needed an operating model technology in order to start the machine and so on. So this is now in this watch, by the way, the whole world, right? By the way, the final product looked a bit like this. And then I moved through time. In 2000, I was using a Psion. Any Psion users in this room? The elderly, so to say. Psion was a BlackBerry avant la lettre, you know, and it had a piece of software with a crazy name and a crazy logo, and the company was called TomTom. It was a software company. And I moved through time again, 2005, and they had concluded they were not a software company, they were actually a product company. And they created TomTom Go, which with the knowledge of today, you could ask, was that real innovation? You know, the touchscreen was there, the battery technology was there, the digital maps was there. What they did is they brought it together, they made it affordable, and above all, they created an interface that anybody understands. That's why it was called TomTom Go. And in 2005, they were owning the world. And particularly when you're good in technology, you can predict what will happen, because you will definitely not be the only one in the world that understands the value. So part of digital transformation is when you do a good job, your competitive advantage will be relatively short. You need to stay on top of it constantly, because constantly there's new. And now I go to the next phase. Once they faced this competition, they obviously understood, and this is already 7 years ago, that they needed to change their business model again. So they went to the cloud, first with Google, and then afterwards decided for the Azure platform with Microsoft. And that allowed them to not only create a number of new propositions, like new products, but also to embed themselves in industrial companies. So in this particular case, PSA, the French automotive manufacturing company. And then you could think, well, now I'm safe for disruption. I can, you know, and then something else happened. And this is a personal story that I want to share with you, because I know the story from the inside out. And the reason I know it is because this guy is my son. And he works at Google X in Mountain View, California. And he got from the founders of Google $2 million just to illustrate how they innovate. And they said to him, buy yourself a Maserati and a BMW and a Mercedes and a Ford, rip out the in-car telematic system, exchange it for a big screen like the Tesla in the middle, and create Android for car. Choose your own team. So 2 years in the road, or sorry, 1 year in the process, he got a visit from the big industrial companies, one of them, one of the bigger ones in Germany, Herr Doctor, 45 years old, like me, my son, 29, slippers, and the first thing this guy says is, I'd like to talk to your boss. And my son says, it's me. He couldn't imagine that you would put somebody of 29 years old responsible for such a program. Second question, how long have you been working on this? It was already ready. 9 months. How many people? 30. Do they have any knowledge of automotive? Zilch. None. And then my son asked, if I may, how long have you been working on this? 3 years. How many people? 300. Do they know automotive? They only know automotive. That's Industry 4.0. It's going to change your world. And this is a typical example of a platform, because what happened, going back to my story about TomTom, I don't know if any of you has shares in TomTom, but if you do, you have been hurt, because guess what? These companies decided to move away from TomTom and go for this. And what will that deliver to them? First of all, it will deliver an operating system mashing Google Assistant and Google Maps and Google what have you with in-car telematics and motor management and IoT, Industry 4.0. It's an illustration of why platforms, as I started out with my guy in front of his fireplace, are so important. It's not just about producing goods in an efficient way. It's about changing business models, and it's about speed. So here's the video explaining what that brings. Can you, the audio take some time again? Yeah. Because of time, I'll go quicker. So what can you move a few slides further, because I was just informed that I need to be shorter than I had anticipated. We'll leave that for what it is. Maybe the only thing that I want to say about this is that a colleague of mine recently produced this research in which he asked himself, what are the manifestations of typical business models in relationship to platforms? This one you know very well, assets and physical goods, software and data, platforms. And then he concluded that when you look at it from a value creating perspective, when you're in this space, you use technology to basically be more efficient. Whether when you're in this space, and particularly in the platform, you're there to create much more value. And here's a video of him explaining, can you progress it please? Explaining what he meant by that.
As you moved from one business model to another, the value that Wall Street would pay was exponential. That if you made things, your value was 1 times revenue. So these are revenue multipliers. Now there's variability inside of each one of these boxes, but to keep it simple, you're worth about 1 times revenue. If you provide a service, you're worth about 2 times revenue. Same revenues, possibly same profits, double the valuation. You cross the divide, it goes from 2 to 4. So if you are a biotechnology company, if you're inventing, if you're creating software, anything that's IP-based, and let me just differentiate, I'm not talking about the manufacturing of drugs. That has a different value, that's bottom left. But the invention is top left. 4 times revenue. Or if you move into what would be some of the traditional companies, like the big credit card companies, right? They've created a platform that retailers and consumers trade on. If you're in that platform business, again, it's double or 8 times revenue. Now, if you climbed behind the research, what you'd find is that the bottom left is 1 to 2, the bottom right is 2 to 3, 4 to 5, 8 to 15, and beyond. So very...
Let that sink in for a moment. When you are in this type of a business model, creating a platform in which others participate, the value that Wall Street is willing to pay for your company is in between 8 or 15 times the revenue that you create. Whether when you just produce stuff, it's 1. So a valid question to ask yourself, as I did in the company where I'm on the supervisory board, can we create a platform that will allow us to do this? And we did. We monitor any greenhouse that is equipped with our technology in the world, delivering data for growers to be much more effective, much more efficient. So a question you could ask yourself is, in parts of the markets that you're servicing with products, would there be an opportunity to translate those products into services or even platforms that could be valuable to dive into? I'm trying to get it. Okay. So digital disruption is part of this game. And we in the Center for the Edge created some research about this.
We believe there's a significant white space in the discussions around disruption. Disruption is being talked about everywhere. It's on everybody's mind. But no one is talking about how to anticipate disruption. How could we look ahead and get a better sense of what kinds of disruption are most likely to hit our marketplace? That ability to anticipate disruption is very compelling to executives who are feeling overwhelmed and under attack from anywhere and everywhere at the same time. If we could help them to look ahead and see which forms of disruption they're most vulnerable to, that would be a big deal.
So I'm sure some of you will recognize and remember Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, a Harvard professor, in which he introduced the concept of disruption. And being 20 years after the publication of that book, what we did in the Center for the Edge, which is a research entity of which I'm a fellow and close to Singularity University, is we try to identify what would be typical patterns of disruption that in some cases are basically driven by digitization. And so we identified a total of 9 patterns of disruption. Investments that companies can take, either new entrants or existing companies, to enter into your world and disrupt you, or for you to be able to disrupt somebody else. Now, without going into all the details here, also because of time, let me just share with you an example. Pattern number 4 is to align price with use. And a typical example of this, I'm sure some of you will know, is to not sell expensive assets as a one-off, but to sell it as a bundle of services. In the airline industry, it's called power by the hour. So to align price with use, in this particular case, GE manifests itself, maybe this is the trick, yeah, manifests itself by a total of 7 types of innovation. One is obviously on the profit model. That is different because you do not sell a huge asset, you sell a bundle of services. Another one is on the process. Data monitoring and predictive analysis allows GE to know when an engine needs service. Another one is on the product system. Engine trade-in programs, line management, and technology upgrades are all bundled together. So here's a typical example of one of 9 different patterns of disruption that we see happening in the industrial world, in which you're moving away from selling one-off products towards bundles of services that can only be managed because they are digital. They are created digital. In fact, you sell the whole machine and you basically turn off part of the functionality because the client is not willing to pay for that functionality. And this is just one of examples. So we have a total of more than 100 cases, business cases, for each of these patterns to allow you to see whether that works. So I could imagine that for some of you, it might be worth your while to investigate this. Now, I have a video here of the competitor and how they're doing it, but because of time, I'll leave it. So as Deloitte, we have created a lot of research on Industry 4.0. This is what we've created in that space. The second dimension to this topic is obviously, apparently it works the best when I do it like this. Yeah, is on additive manufacturing, which, by the way, according to your BCG survey, is one of the lowest on your list, interestingly enough. But I'll get back to that in a moment. The third one is, on Internet of Things. So just to share with you that for those of you that are interested, more than happy to make available to you the links to those research pieces that might be of use to some of you. And now let me just dive into one that we have recently published only 2 weeks ago, and that this is just really terrible. Okay, sorry guys. Sorry. No, the thing is that my machine is there. I was assuming that I could connect here, and so it's it's Microsoft environment here, and I'm Apple. Sorry, digital. But anyway, so this is Industry 4.0. Maybe when I step here, okay, and nothing's happening. And you, our colleagues, have commissioned to our colleagues of BCG this research piece. So what I've done in preparation of this meeting, I've compared the two. This is obviously not scientific, because in a science environment you need to have the same parameters and the same questions, blah, blah, blah. But I've tried to really understand where you are and where you are going according to your research, and then I've plotted it. I've been particularly interested in where are differences that we see. So bear with me. We have obviously, our research is 361 executives, as in director plus level, industrial companies across the world, 11 countries, 500 million plus revenue. So this is the base of fact that we have used for our approach. Yes, so the first, what we have concluded is in our research is that although there's a lot of information and a lot of buzz around this, it's not going as fast as some of us might expect. And you see that in your research too. So we have asked ourselves the question, why is it taking longer than some of us have anticipated? And we found basically a number of paradoxes. Paradoxes as in, I want this, but I want that too, and it contradicts each other. We found 5. On the strategic level, on the innovation level, on what we call the PDP loop, so that is the loop that transforms data into insights and goes back into reality, the talent paradox and the supply chain paradox. Let me just dive into the first one. So key finding on the strategic, in the Deloitte research, on the strategic level is, first of all, 94% of all respondents indicate that digital transformation is a top strategic objective. Similar to what I find in your research. There's nobody, almost nobody in your industry that says, you know, the hell with it. No, it is important. It's considered, but as they say in proper English, putting your money where your mouth is, only 68% of all respondents, and particularly 50% of the CEOs of these Western companies, indicate that their transformations are critical to maintaining profitability. So in other words, half of the CEOs in the West is not convinced that Industry 4.0 is actually a survival mechanism for profitability. And that is also something I read in your research, you know, what validates the investments that we're talking about. Another one, digital transformation may be viewed as defensive investments, rather to protect current revenue streams than to create new value, as in the example that I gave of GE, that is creating a new value, a new proposition. But the really interesting one from me as a tech guy is this one. On average, companies plan to invest a median of 30% of their operating IT budget on digital initiatives and 11% on R&D. And here's a question for you guys. How much are you spending in digital IT as an industrial firm? Does that reach 30%? When I look at your research, no way, Jose. It's 5, and I'm being optimistic. And if I read your research, if I believe my esteemed colleagues in BCG, which I do, then the difference between what you say is your ambition and what I see in the companies that I visit, you're fooling yourself. To be honest, I'm being Dutch blunt here, but forgive me for that. The world is changing rapidly, and some of these players, on average, are investing 30% in making that change. So let's go quick again. Go on. Here's your slide, taken from the BCG research. Right? So, yes, it will increase Turkey's. I totally believe that. 80% says that. Yes, it will digital transformation will be broadly applied by my company. Well, all the nice things are there. But when we look at the real investment, this one I find rather difficult to believe, to be honest. My company is ready for the digital transformation of the industry. That is at least not what I find in my visits to companies in your country. So, in the recommendations, we don't have the time, so I've highlighted in each of them one which I feel should be on your radar screen. Consider increasing time and financial investments in digital transformation R&D efforts. What we see a lot, as you saw me in my own role at Priva, is to digitize products that are already existing. And based on that, get customer feedback, get more intelligent solutions, and based on that feedback, improve the R&D of the existing product rather than to go for the big bang and the new one. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the innovation paradox. Top two factors driving digital transformations are cited by the respondents in the survey. One, productivity improvement. That is all over the place in Turkey, so no debate there. Second one is operational goals, which is also, lean manufacturing and so on, that type of approach. However, the survey data suggests that equally positive ROIs can be realized when organizations are driven by an increased desire for innovation. Hence, the conclusion that to integrate more digitalization in your products, in your R&D, could well be an area to look into. When I compare this to the research you have commissioned yourself, product efficiency, top of mind, similar. Resource efficiency, all these, operational excellence, and relatively low, if not almost invisible, on innovation. A question you might ask yourself as an industry, some of what this country does is top of the bill. Yesterday we had our Company of the Year award, which I had the privilege to speak as well. There's no doubt in my mind you have really good companies. But there is also an element there of what I would call fast follower, right? You wait for other economies to figure out what works and what doesn't work, and then you replicate and you improve, which is a good strategy. The question is whether you can do that with digital transformation as well. Sorry about that. Because the reason that I'm making this point is that for a lot of these digital capabilities, you will only master them by doing it. And when you start doing innovation digitally, when you feel that you can follow, you might be too late. So in other words, to build a capability, digital capability that is sustainable is a wise thing to do. From the recommendations on our side, actually what I'm saying right now, digital transformation is doing more than ever doing PowerPoint, really trialing, using some of the methodologies we'll touch upon in a moment. Go on. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Okay. Here's your own research and the list of technologies that you are currently looking into and how far you are on a, let's say, scale of implementation. Going quickly to the next one. What we call the physical-digital physical loop. In other words, we feel that a lot of our clients that we have interviewed say more than 90% of the report gathering some data on the physical world, but fewer are able to analyze those data, and only about half report being able to act upon it in real time. And one of the reasons is because they do not cover the whole, what we call PDP loop. In other words, what is that loop? Just as a short introduction, it's very simple. You have a physical world. In the physical world, you make a digital record of an event. That digital record is transformed into intelligence that makes sense of that observation. Because you have it digitally available, you can do all kinds of insights in the digital world, predictive maintenance and so on. Once you've done that, you give that back to the real world to generate a movement, to generate an initiative, to generate a feedback loop. So that is basically the type of loops that we're talking about here. What I see in your research, there's a huge dominance of relatively traditional ERP. Definitely not S/4HANA as an example. MES in the middle. But particularly in this part, the supply chain and the sensor capabilities part, that is relatively low when I compare it to other economies and research. Because part of digital transformation is actually this, right? You have all these different dimensions of the supply chain and the customer, and the integration of them is where the real intelligence starts, where you have the real feedback loop and where you can learn from what's happening in the market. One of the, let's say, recommendations that we have when it comes to the physical, digital, physical loop is generating and data focusing should be on completing the PDP loop as a roadmap for technology investments. So you take a particular, let's say, product line and you capture data in the whole process until it basically, the product is decommissioned in the market, and based on that build the insights that can bring you forward. Go on. Yep. Then the talent paradox. This is a really big one. Only 15% of respondents indicate they need to dramatically alter the composition of skill set. Yet the number one organizational cultural related challenges cited is finding, training, and retaining the right talent. So in the West, the battle for talent, and particularly the new digital skills like data science and artificial intelligence and robotic engineering, those are the new jobs, which I'm afraid I will not have the time for in the rest, but we have some research on this that will be fought for in the coming years. An obstacle in your case is the investment, which is, in any business, not just in Turkish business. Investment is always a challenge and a discussion. But what struck me is that in your case, the perception is that the talent burden is only 16%, whereas in our research, it's 35%. So either you have an abundance of talent, could be, or you're not yet looking for the new talent. That could also be, I don't know. But it is definitely a difference. Then our recommendations: make upfront investments in talent development, which can help ensure employees have the right skills. So that is training, apprentices and so on, to really take it. And also to have this definition, which I'll show you if I get to it, of a list of new capabilities that an industrial firm that is digitally transformed will need. And important, those that you do not need anymore because they are robotized. Then we go to the supply chain paradox, also a very important one. Respondents most planned for future investment areas, supply chain, 62%. Only 22% involves the chief supply chain officer in that discussion, which is funny. What I found difficult in your research, to be honest, is that, and obviously I didn't spend a week to study it, so maybe I've missed something, so forgive me if that is the case. But what I found challenging in your research is that I didn't find a chapter on supply chain. Is that correct? Did I miss something? Digital supply chains. I think it's an extremely important one. And at least our research says leverage what we call digital supply chain networks for new innovative and transformative uses of technology, which can drive end-to-end supply chain transparency and intelligent decision making. Just to zoom into that for a moment. This is your typical traditional supply chain, right? You develop something, you plan. The planning is always an assumption about reality, the availability of resources, the availability of raw materials, blah, blah. Then you source, sometimes with partners in the supply chain, and then you produce. And then it turns out to be that it was inaccurate inventory, and it was inaccurate data, and so on. And then you deliver, and then you support. I mean, I'm making life very easy here, but you understand the model. This is a typical traditional supply chain. When we use the term digital supply chain network, this is what we mean. It is a digital core, and the digital core is able to identify plannings of different players in the chain and synchronizes them. It is extremely adaptive to disruption. When there's disruption, it reacts, it interprets, it predicts. It is extremely well connected to the user, hence the example of GE. GE or Rolls-Royce aircraft engine, they see what their user is doing with the product, and based on that they improve both the R&D but as well as the predictive maintenance. Dynamic fulfillment. If I can't get there through this route, I can fulfill in another modality. Digital development, so using the feedback, intelligent supply, and obviously the smart factory where it starts. So one of the things that struck me in the research in comparison to the research that you have published is that there is a relatively let's say, representation of supply chain. Here's where we see in digital supply chains the values that companies that we consult are trying to get out of this. And because of the time, I'll go quick. So revenue, margin improvement, better use of assets and efficiency in the use of those assets, and better predictability towards stakeholders and clients so they know what they're getting. Now, going back to the DNS loop, when you look at this from a digital perspective, it's not one technology, right? You'll see it here in a moment. It is a whole spectrum of new technologies that in their combination create a digital supply chain network. And I'm more than happy, I see a lot of you making pictures. I will share this presentation also with you, including the links to the research, so don't worry, but keep on making pictures, I don't mind. Yeah. And on top of that, obviously, the security. So here's a typical bundle of the type of technologies that you will need to improve the digital capability of the supply chain. And as I said, what strikes me in the research that came out of our survey, this is considered to be, in industrial companies in the West, a crucial part of Industry 4.0. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, okay. Because of time, I'll go quicker, and I'll just focus on a few things that I thought were interesting. This one is a particularly interesting one. In which technologies should Turkish industry focus? 1%, according to your research, says cloud. Now that is the one that struck me tremendously. Because here's what we find. In mining, 68% is already in the cloud. Manufacturing, 64%. Power and utilities, 72%. Oil and gas, 65%. That's a major difference. It's an interesting one to debate when we're here on stage. So for us, in other parts of the world, this is major business. And it's not just lift and shift, right? And this is not just cloud as in Azure. It's also cloud as in Predix, GE, or create your own cloud. Again, platform, platform, platform. Because once you are there, that allows you to connect to others that have a platform in the cloud as well. So it's an interesting debate to have, and it's an interesting difference to see. You see it also from your suppliers, right? Cloud is 6%. We see a huge shift in the market. For those of you that have old traditional outsourcing contracts with, let's say, offshore partners, whom of you got innovation out of an outsourcing contract? Any? Do you get innovation out of your outsourcing contracts? No. You do. It's what we call reduction of total cost of ownership, right? That's not in your interest. That's in the interest of your supplier, because that reduces their cost. So a lot of companies in the West are using the cloud to get rid of outsourcing contracts. They move to S/4HANA, they bring it to the cloud, and they bring it back from India or wherever they put it. Because that will deliver to them the flexibility and the innovation power that they need in order to scale, particularly for those of you that are internationally oriented. So that was one of the observations that struck me, again, as an outsider, so I'm definitely just looking into this. This is another one. I couldn't find that in your research, digital twins. We see a tremendous investment in our clients. You know, you see the numbers here. What is it? Blue one, global standard, 19, green one, phasing to broader use in the organization, 33, 35, piloting. A digital twin is defined as to create a digital copy of the physical asset using sensors to basically monitor use, monitor performance, predict downtime, allowing you to create a different type of contract similar to the GE. So that is also, and this is a whole list of things that our clients tell us that what they are working on Industry 4.0. This is the one that I couldn't really find in your research. Okay, here's some examples of digital twins. I don't know if is it a topic in this country or not. Are you looking into this? So here's something we created for a Norwegian company called DNV, who have created a software platform, there you go again, that will allow you to monitor a physical, complex industrial environment. It's not just one machine, it's thousands of machines and pumps and sensors and what have you. And by creating the digital representation, it will allow the client and the insurance company and whomever has an interest to see their version of reality and act upon it. This is a big thing. It is really taking off in a lot of industrial companies. Also to sell it to the client as an additional service. Do you want to know how your wind turbine is performing? Well, for additional 20,000 per year, we will tell you. Right? That's what a digital twin does. Okay, and then once you have a digital twin, that will allow you and your client to better train your staff. Because mass customization delivers different versions of the same product to different clients. And by using augmented reality, here in the case of an elevator, you can send somebody to the elevator and basically tune the information on this particular configuration of the elevator to his individual needs whilst you're making a video recording. So you can always prove towards the client, we did the right thing in terms of maintenance. And meanwhile, you're training this guy on the spot. That's also one of the benefits of having a digital twin. You see this all over the place. Here's an example that I've taken from the oil and gas industry. Digitization is just about in any domain. Now, I had prepared for this meeting a second part, but I see that I'm out of time. So you tell me what you want me to do. 5 minutes, okay, then I'll go very quickly. So the second part is about digital operating models, and it starts from the premise that there will be new technology. Even if you don't do anything, you don't invest, there still will be new technology because you're not in control. So instead of waiting what happens, you might want to conclude that I want to basically prepare myself for a world in which I constantly need to adapt to new digital technology. And I'm sure, particularly in industrial companies, and here in Turkey, I see this a lot. On the front end, there's really sexy digital technology, apps and what have you. And then in the cellar, there's a team. We closed the door, we opened up the hatch, we threw in a sandwich, and we said, cheaper and shut the up. It's called the IT team. And our point is, particularly my point, because I'm one of the authors of this is just not sustainable in an industrial firm. You cannot have sexy promises towards clients versus reality in the cellar. It needs to be brought together. So digital transformation in your industry, not only in your industry, but definitely in your industry, should be about the following change. And I'm taking an aircraft carrier to explain the complexity. First of all, when you take an aircraft carrier as a representation of your information function, so that's in IT and in digital, it's all over the place, this aircraft carrier needs to change in a number of dimensions at the same time. The first one is, and particularly prevalent in Turkey, I think, to decommission legacy systems. Oh, I'm going too fast now. Go back. I'm waiting for it to react and then okay, there we go. They're out there, they're just about to run out of petrol, and if you don't do anything, they will drop into the ocean. And you cannot afford that because they run the current business. So decommissioning of old technology in industrial companies is a paramount important thing. One of the reasons why an investment like S/4HANA is considerable in some cases to rationalize. Second one is, whilst you are trying to keep up with the old, the business wants you to do the new stuff. Launch unmanned drones. The platform was not created to launch unmanned drones, but nevertheless, the business wants you to do that. So, okay, off we go. We try to do that. And whilst we're doing that, the business we do know, in this case in the aircraft carrier, that is inbound aircraft and outbound aircraft, is changing as well. Because guess what? They don't fly in like this, they fly in like that. And if you do that 100 times, it will literally burn itself through the platform because it was not designed for this. And whilst we're doing all this complexity, we're also being challenged to, there we go, we're also being challenged because we're changing the rudder, we're changing the propulsion system, and above all, we're changing the team. So a lot of companies, industrial companies, feel that they need to redesign their aircraft carrier in technical terms in order to be able to quickly launch new speedboats and afford to be able to sink them if they don't work. That's the idea. Now, final words before we go to the... This is an introduction to something that I don't have the time to discuss with you now, so I'll send it to you later with a 4-minute video that explains it. Basic messages. Together with a colleague and our international network, we asked ourselves, if you look at the aircraft carrier that we call technology in a company, in an industrial company, what is changing? Similar to what you saw a moment ago. And we feel there's 9 things changing, 9 shifts that are taking place at the same time. So you don't get to choose. 3 of them are about how we work in technology. 3 of them are about what do I need to work like this? And 3 of them are about the technology itself. So without going into the details, very quickly, agile ways of working. How does that work? There's 4 types of agile in the world, and you'd better understand what the difference is. Blurring boundaries. Is it technology from the business or from the IT department or something in between? Platforms. Am I going to participate in platforms? Create my own platform? Very important. Am I going to share data, algorithms, or not? Workforce transformation. Which skills will evaporate as a result of cloud and robotization? Which new skills do I need? Digital DNA. What type of culture do you need to be able to work in an agile way? Because that's a different way of working. Governance. If you want to be fast experimentation type of industrial companies, and there's a lot of examples of that, you need a budget for that, because part of that approach is that you fail. You want to fail because you learn by failing. And then finally, these 3. The move towards cloud, which I already elaborated on. The second one, at the core of the future, data and the importance of data. We call it algorithmic business. And then finally, particularly in your industry, the merger, or convergence rather, between IT, office technology, and OT, operational technology. These two worlds are converging. And digital is the glue between those two worlds, but they are fundamentally different. So, as an introduction, I'll leave it at that, and I'll leave it up to you to take over. Thank you.
Speech and the insight.
It was a bit of an improvisation, but I hope it came across.
Is there any question?
Yes, sir.
Brock from Archivik.
Yes.
My question is, you have mentioned about the talent and its relation to its information technologies.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned about the R&D.
Yeah.
Okay. Burak from Archivik again, from beginning. Is it okay?
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you.
You have mentioned about the change in the information technologies and its spending in the industrial companies. And you also mentioned about the R&D, people and employees, and you have mentioned about the skill sets.
Yeah.
How do Deloitte or your customers see the integration of these talents in the new organizations?
Well,
are they IT organizations, OT organizations?
Yeah, it's a perfect question. So, but I'm trying to manage my computer from here, so I hope I will be able to. Yeah, there we have it. One of the 9 is called blurring boundaries. Just before I go to the blurring boundaries, sorry about this. We feel, I wrote it myself partly, so obviously, but it's not. I'm sure most of you recognize these boxes. It's not rocket science. The true value of this is not to say, okay, we do Agile, we go to the cloud, blah, blah, blah. It's important to know. But the most important one is to answer the question, of all of these 9 things that are changing my aircraft carrier, whether I like it or not, right? Which one to me is the dominant one? Is that to work Agile? Okay, if work Agile is the dominant one, how are the others going to help me? Well, if I were to decide, dear business colleagues, to go to the cloud, then Agile will be much easier. So to go to the cloud, in our terms, is a booster. It will boost the dominant one, which is Agile. Yet the moment I say I'm going to go to the cloud, you implicitly also say that 20 to 30% of your current IT staff will need to go away. Because it's not your infrastructure. It's not your application anymore. In the case of Priva, where I'm a supervisory board member, 60% of the workforce in 2009 has not survived this transformation. So going back to your question, number 2 of the 9, we call blurring boundaries. As I said, in the past it's IT or it's business, but that is changing. So one of the things that is important to agree upon amongst yourself. Go on. Oh, it's not here, sorry. It's in another version. Are these Agile teams in the business, or are they in the IT department and commissioned to the business? And an extremely important one in industrial companies, and I've visited a lot of these companies, is the discussion between the business IT, sometimes the CDO, Chief Digital Officer, and the CIO, who runs the operational systems. Where is the border? And to repeat that discussion every 6 months. Because what you see is that the more mature you become in working Agile, the more need you will have to scale these new technologies. If you're an industrial firm, you don't like proof of concepts. I mean, you like them, but they're only relevant when they scale. Because what you do in its nature is scale, right? So we see a lot of, let's say in this topic, actually we produce a separate publication on the relation between the CDO and CIO. In this field, we see a lot of different configurations on what we call the handover. So where does it leave the domain of, we've tried it and it works for this particular client, proof of concept, and now it needs to scale. Because in scaling is also supplier, is also security, is also data. So in this research, we've identified a number of models that industrial companies are using to stop fighting each other and to be productive in, okay, the most sensible thing to do this is to scale. And important, obviously, in this domain is some of you are in an industrial world in which you produce things that have to be compliant. So their scaling is not just because you want to make more money or you want to serve as many customers, it's also because you need to abide to the law, otherwise they will not buy your product. I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation. Serdar Uçar from Netaş. Just one question. We keep talking about talent, and I think a digital transformation project is about connecting technology and the right type of people, right technology, right people.
Yeah.
And when we talk about talent, we generally talk about white-collar workers. At least that's the way I understand it. But in industrial companies, when you try to succeed in a digital transformation project, I believe blue-collar workers and their education is also very critical.
Absolutely.
So can you give us some examples from the companies that you worked or visited where they have this successful implementation of blue-collar education and cultural transformation?
Yeah. So let me just start by the digital side of this, and then we'll turn to the manufacturing side and the blue-collar side in a moment. But in general, this is what we see happening. So when you look at technology skills, whether they are in IT or in R&D or in the business, we see the following phenomenon. Part of that crew that you currently have will not be able to be on board simply because what they do will be replaced by an algorithm. Infrastructure management, application management. So that is jobs disappearing due to automation of manual technology work. Then there is IT staff that cannot make the transition because of new capabilities that they simply cannot adapt to. And then hopefully you have a pretty good bunch of people that although they might not have the right skills, when you teach them, they will have the right skills. Now on this side, there's another one added, which is those skills that you do not have at all, but you will need. Here's a list. So in the research, you will find a list of jobs, new jobs, which we think, in some cases, you will need. 3D printing engineer. You don't have it. And is that a techie or is that an engineer, right? Or both. And so we call them, I don't have the slides available now, we call them purple people, right? Because they have this tech side part, but also this industrial engineering part. They understand both worlds. They can talk the language of both worlds. They understand the implication. If the engineering side says this, they mean to say, in digital terms, that. But they're using a different language, right? So that is one part that I wanted to dive into. Oh, it's such a pity that I can't control my computers myself. Oh, here's the list, by the way, of the hunting list that we see currently and the hunting list that we feel will be there in, let's say, 3 to 5 years. Again, I'm sharing this with you, so you're happy to make the picture. Now, let me go quickly to another, and then I'll get back to you because I'm trying to manage my computer from here, and it's a bit of a technical challenge. Go on. Okay. Yeah, so one thing that I wanted to take out for a moment because I feel it is vital to what you guys do. Number 5, which is in 9 shifts, the center, number 5, is not by accident number 5 in the center, because it is one of the most important ones. It is the culture, the non-techie stuff, which at the end of the day, most of the time makes the difference, right? So, entering Deloitte, coming in from the office of the CIO research team in Gartner, where I used to work, I was confronted with research that we do together with MIT Sloan. Really nice stuff. And being researcher, I took the data set, which was already available, and I started to basically cluster the questions. So any question on leadership, okay, that's one topic. That's a DNA component. Investment appetite. Okay, it's also a DNA. You invest or you don't invest. What else? Is there a strategy on digital? Okay, so you can imagine At the end of this process, I had 3,700 companies, bunch of data, and we found 13 DNA components. There they are. 13 components. Any company needs to decide, am I going to invest? Will innovation be important? Am I going to recruit new people? Here comes the trick. Then we created an algorithm. And we asked the algorithm, find patterns. And we found 4. So it might be that Turkey is the 5th, but I have not found it in my data. So if you assume that you are not that much different from the rest of the world, here's what we learned. Laggards. They basically underperform on any dimension. Leadership, minus 29. Experimentation and risk-taking, minus 28. Investment, minus 27. I don't know the Turkish word, but in English it would be oblivion. You don't know where you are, and you definitely don't know where you're going to, right? Then there's a second category. It is a category that I always jokingly say, is every consulting firm's dream. Because they still underperform. Have a look. But guess what? They spend a lot of money doing it. Lovely. These are the type of organizations in which on average you see a lot of pockets of innovation. You know, I always jokingly say, somebody in your team probably is looking into blockchain, and we probably have somebody in the cellar that wants to sell you blockchain, so let's do a proof of concept. Yeah, right? That's pockets of innovation, no scalability, just spending money down the drain. And then we found 2 that are actually very successful, but they are fundamentally different. And it's an interesting discussion to have amongst yourself, with your board. The one is what we call fast-moving experimenter. What makes them different is that they have a real appetite for risk, but they mitigate the risk by keeping the risk small. So in a fast-moving experimenter, you would see on average 60 digital initiatives at the same time. And the talent of the leadership, above anything else, is to kill stuff. They're really good at killing. On the other hand, if it does work, because the data tell me, because the client is using it or buying it, they have put in place an operating model that is capable to scale when it works, sometimes known as DevOps, develop, operate. Fast-moving experiment, agile way of working, etc. And then the other successful, fundamentally different approach is what we have called talent and strategy-led. They are, first of all, extremely good in attracting new talent, plus 36%, changing the DNA of the engineers by bringing in engineers with a techie approach. Not forgetting to invest a lot in the existing workforce. What you don't want to have is A-B employees. You know, you got the ponytail sexy guys doing the digital, and you got in the cellar the engineers, you know, making the money. You don't want to have that. You know? So you really want to have the 2 synchronized. The third one is extremely strong leadership, but here's what the difference is. 5 initiatives, big ones. Let me give you an example. You can imagine an industrial company in the copying, print, fax machine environment. They have a supply chain environment at Schiphol Airport. 6 football fields for all these machines that they service. We made an inventory. Which of those spare parts could you 3D print? 30%. Second question, what do you think was the business case? Any idea? What made the business case? Business case for them. Yeah? I'm just asking. What do you think? Yes, availability. Yes, on demand. Yes. All true. But here's the business. Yeah. The best one was tax. You don't have to import.
Of course. Digital copy comes and you manufacture it.
Yes. So what you will find, and I can't go there because it's at the end of my presentation and I can't play with my presentation here, but please do me a favor and go to YouTube and type in Deloitte digital thread. thread, digital thread. And I prepared nice videos, but we're not going to do that tonight. You will find there a total of 10 videos of the whole process of following an industrial product that is digitized, including 3D printing and so on. And it's a real nice example. It was created together with MIT Sloan, so it's scientific. But anyway, you can have a you can have a look at it. I can't go to the other slide, so because it takes too much time to get there. But going back to your last part, so the merger or the collaboration between your let's say your engineers and that is particularly in what we would call box number 9, the merger between IT and OT. One of the major problems there is a cultural problem. You know, latency 99.9% versus, you know, we'll just restart and whatever. You know, the worlds that are fundamentally different. And that's why we, as a firm, also are hiring a lot of purple people that can be the bridge between these two worlds. Because to us, it is evident, and to most of our clients in the industrial space, that you cannot afford to have shop floor versus office technology in the future. That needs to be integrated. Yes, sir.
Point of view. As every revolution, technological revolution, they take time for developing all around the world. Mm-hmm. Some countries accept it before, others later. Yeah. And this is a matter of DNA, this is a matter of the history, this is a matter of how they can grow as a country. Mm-hmm. Now my question is this. You were surprised for some answer about cloud, about other issues. Yeah. In your opinion, looking into the research that you did and the research that you read, yeah, and looking around what you know about Turkey, what is the system, the gasoline that can accelerate this gap between Turkey and the other countries?
That's a hard one. First of all, again, and I'm not saying this to, as you say in English, butter you up, right? I truly have great respect for what you do in this country. And having been a guest to this country already, 40 years ago, I've seen the massive change. So, I respect that. Secondly, it is the problem, and I don't have the slide, but you might remember that some of these technologies, let's put it like that, have what we call an exponential character. That means to say that in my former job in Gartner, it would be called the hype cycle, right? It's the top of inflated expectations. RFID will take the hunger out of the world, and then the bottom of the trough of disillusionment, and then you hope it will work. We call them exponential. And exponential means that we expect a certain technology to grow over time and become better and better and better, whereas exponentials start out, it's nothing, it's not going to work, all kinds of problems, and then all of a sudden it goes like this. Now, what is different with 5 to 10 years ago is that in the latter part of that slide, the window of opportunity to try stuff out and to fail and to learn, that window is becoming increasingly smaller and smaller and smaller. So by the time that you understand that our 3D printing is going to change your world because you're not selling printers anymore, but you're selling bundles of services that need that spare part, by that time you're too late to learn how to do 3D printing as part of your overall. So my answer to you would be, you have come a long way as an economy and as a knowledge base in smart copying, and do that in a high pace. Just look around. What I feel is a major, let's say, challenge in your culture is to allow for failure. And that starts in school. That starts in education. If I ask most of our clients, what would you want to be if you were to choose between talented strategy leaders, assuming that that is the right, assuming my data are correct and my algorithm did the right thing. If you were to choose between talent and strategy led versus fast moving experimenter, what would you really like to be? 90% says fast moving experimenter. And the reason why they want that is that they are not in control on all of these new technologies that keep on. That's why I started out with the tornado, right? Nobody's going to ask Turkey, would you like to have 3D printing? It's going to happen. And when you don't master it, bad luck. But to master it, you need to accept failure. And it's not by accident that when you read your research, why do most of your companies, I'm being very black and white here, right? Why do most of your companies like Industry 4.0? Efficiency, predictability. All the lean manufacturing arguments, which in my view are as sanitation. If you don't have that, you're dead anyway, right? But the real value is there is this new technology, and when I combine it with this technology, and I create a platform in which I can sell this, guess what? Wall Street's going to pay 8 times the value of my yearly revenue. Whereas if I just keep on producing as efficient as you can this product, it will be one time. I always say jokingly, but it has some truth in it. In the board, yesterday I said it on stage, right? Turkey's Company of the Year. You know what? Nokia was the Company of the Year. And somebody in the supervisory board should have said, hello, there's something new out there. They were using an operating model from Cyan. You remember my example. Symbian, it was called. And nobody, they were so busy with. So I feel that, one, to allow for failure, also in your education, in your management structure. That means funding for failure, which is really difficult. Really difficult. Money down the drain. No, we're learning by doing. Thirdly, make it your job also to have a broad radar screen of these new technologies. So if I take digital supply chain networks as an example, it struck me that in your analysis, and I have not read it through, right? So maybe I'm missing something here. It was just not there. At least not to the level that I would have expected. And if I look at your priority list of what are the technologies that matter, and I compare them to what we found, there's some substantial differences, which I cannot explain other than to say they're different. You might be right. I don't know. You might be right. But at least to have a broad overview is the fourth one. And then the last one is, I would say that as an industry, a goal you could, let's say, define amongst yourselves as Turkish industry is to say, we want to transform our aircraft carrier to be able to be future-proof. And what strikes me is that in the clients and the companies that I visit in this country, and I say this again with respect, I find a lot of really old technology. I find CIOs that have been in their job for 20 years. You know, the average life expectancy of a CIO in a Western industrial company is 4 years. That's the honest answer. I hope that you forgive me that I'm honest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Time
Thank
is
you.
up.
Okay. I hope that this is on a positive note. You're doing great.
Positive. I believe Mr. Grieken contributes a huge contribution about our awakeness, let's say, because just we are working on subject. Of course, will be some differences, and very good to understand where we are behind or there's some differences. Thank you very much.
Well, so one remark here, just to be sure that this is not taken, not forgotten. It might be you are right. It might be that you are making the bet. Yeah. The only remark I'm making is that you could organize yourself in such a way that the damage of the wrong decision is not that hurtful. And that's what fast-moving experimenters do. Thank you for inviting me over. Thank you. Thank you.
Teşekkür ederim.
Hi, hi.
And in your presentation, you were showing F-35 fighter jet.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's you know the problems about that project.
Yeah,
over
definitely.
Budget, over time. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons is the supply chain networks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it was
because
very
this,
good.
well, also because. Oh, sorry, I need to put this out. Hang on. Also because the